Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harary. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, The Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
And hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Founders Dilemmas podcast. It's great to be with you again. Thank you so much for tuning in. For those that are joining us for the first time, you're in for an incredible episode. Check out some of our previous episodes as well and some of our guests. And as always, it is an honor to be co-hosted with Dean Noam Wasserman. Dean, what do you have for us today?
Charlie, the fun continues. Great to see you again. And also this time around to welcome one of my favorite case protagonists of all time. When I was at Harvard and writing case studies, one of the most fun ones that I did was on a case called Rubbish Boys. And we have the founder of Rubbish Boys, who's going to be with us today to open our eyes to some new things, new flavors of what we've already taken a look at. Brian Scudamore of what turned into 1-800-GOT-JUNK, a massive pioneer in the rubbish hauling industry. And so we'll talk with Brian a bit about his being both a founder, the founder of what then became a franchisor, and get it through the eyes of franchising. Just to set the table on it in terms of big picture, what we're doing right now, last episodes and then now, we're taking a look at a challenge that we faced at the first episode of the first season. And that is what happens if the career readiness is there, what happens if the personal circumstances are good, but you don't have an idea. How can you solve becoming that burning desire that you have to become an entrepreneur? How does the wantrepreneur become an entrepreneur? And so last time around, we took a look at the entrepreneurship by acquisition option. And now we're going to be taking a look at someone else had an idea, built a system around it, built a franchisor that then could sell franchises. And your entree is taking their idea and their system and being able to become an entrepreneur through that. Brian has a wonderful term for it to add on to what we were talking about with the entrepreneur, Entrypreneurship. Be able to have the entry that you're going to be able to come in to it. And so let me just introduce Brian and then we'll welcome him. One of the most acclaimed franchisors ever, now a serial franchisor, the International Franchising Association Entrepreneur of the Year, joining the founders of Marriott, Domino's, Hilton, Dunkin' Donuts, and others within that. Something I'm going to have a question about a little bit later on, named Fortune's Small Business Best Bosses Award. And as I mentioned, both a founder and a franchisor. And so, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on board for us to learn from you.
And well, we go way back to the days of the early Rubbish Boys case study at Harvard, and I've really appreciated our friendship and keeping in touch. And so love sharing anything that I've learned, lessons, failures, mistakes, and excited to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Just going back to that case, one of the reasons that I was interested in it was a data point I had run into just before we met, that if people out there, as you're listening, think about what percentage of the economy you think is franchising. Usually when I put it to my students, they have something around 2 to 4% or something like that. The data point I saw is that it's 8% of the economy. Almost 1/10 of the economy is franchising. And so when you're talking about entree into becoming an entrepreneur, this is a big vista that people totally underestimate. And we have some biases possibly against what it would mean to buy a franchise as opposed to founding yourself or doing things like that. And hopefully Brian will help us burst those and have people see that this is a viable and pretty big opportunity possibly if you find the right domain to be able to do it in. So Brian, why don't you take us back to the early days, the origin of the idea to do what Rubbish Boys and what became 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Very interesting stage of life you had, very interesting dialogue you have to had with your father to be able to explain it to him. So take us through those early days.
Well, the early days, it's fun looking back. And for starters, I will say that I often hear people say, wow, this business, 1-800-GOT-JUNK and everything we've built, what a great overnight success story. It's been 33 years. These overnight success stories take a long time. And if I go back to the beginning, I was literally in a McDonald's drive-through. I was one course short of graduating from high school. Wasn't a great student, mostly because I'm so ADD and I couldn't sit in a classroom and focus. So I am in that drive-through and I'm thinking about what's my future? All my friends are going to college. I talked my way into college, but I didn't have money to pay for it. And I was in that drive-through and I saw this beat up old pickup truck. It was very serendipitous. It was in front of me, filled with junk. And I looked at that truck and I went, that's my ticket. My ticket, not to the career that I've got today that I feel so blessed by, but a ticket to pay for my education, to pay for college. So I start a business, the Rubbish Boys, $700, buy myself a pickup truck, and off I go, starting to haul junk. And within 2 weeks, I paid for the business. By the end of the year, I had funded my college education. But ironically, what I learned from school, and I hate telling a business professor this, but I was learning more myself running a business than I was studying in school. As an entrepreneur, the best route for me as an ADD guy was to get out there and just ask questions, listen from to the words and wisdoms of others, and off I went. So I sat down with my father 3 years into my 4-year business degree, and my father is a liver transplant surgeon, saves lives every day, an incredible man, studied more in college than anyone I've ever met. And you can probably imagine the conversation went something like this. Hey, Dad, he's sitting down. No, and he sits down. I go, I got some great news for you, because I'm an entrepreneur and I present it in the right light. I said, I'm dropping out of school. And he said, how is that good news? He's a big fan of college. He didn't agree with me. And I said, Dad, I am learning so much doing this, and I'm going to build my business, and I'm going to show you that I'm making the right decision. And so I never graduated from high school or college, just kindergarten, my only diploma that I proudly hold. And the rest has been history. But I have had 33 years and still going strong, building an amazing business based on people. I'm wearing today my It's All About People hat, because that's all my business has really been based on and always will be.
So the diploma from the School of Hard Knocks, being able to take the experiential, being able to translate that into lessons and being able to see the opportunity around that. Would you have considered, and say that you hadn't happened upon the rubbish industry, what would you have considered doing?
Depends what I would have happened upon. I would have found something. I think that being an entrepreneur was partially in my family and my blood. A Jewish family, my Russian immigrants, grandparents come over, they start an army surplus store in San Francisco, the dodgy end of town, and they had to work hard to make a buck. I used to go work in their army surplus store, and that's where I got this passion for customer experience, for taking care of people. And it didn't matter what I was going to do. I knew it was going to be in business. I didn't know what product or service I would provide. Yes, it was serendipitous to be in the McDonald's drive-thru. I could have been in a Wendy's or a Burger King and saw a different business and been lit up by something else. I think it was just that I found something, and I saw something in a different way than others saw. So my blank sheeting, building out a business from scratch, was based on a business that already existed. Junk removal's been around forever, but nobody professionalized it. Nobody created systems and processes and brands and uniforms and so on. And so I did it differently. And we got to be at the forefront, be leaders in a space that was so fragmented, and professionalize that entire industry with 1-800-GOT-JUNK.
You know what I love about this story, for those that are listening, is that there may be a misconception that in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to come up with the next big thing. You have to invent a spaceship or create an electric car. You have to sort of be an inventor. And that gets mixed a little bit. And your entrepreneurship was really taking something that was already out there, that wasn't particularly that attractive, and you said, let me take something and make it better. And I think that in itself is an entree point that people don't take enough. Taking an industry that is at a point where if somebody systematized it or somebody made it more efficient or better, that in itself is the concept, versus creating something that doesn't exist as the concept.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, Charlie, is that, like you said, many people think you have to start an idea from scratch. There are more entrepreneurs out there that have been successful by taking someone else's idea and doing it better, or taking a franchise and execution is their secret sauce. So I had the great fortune of meeting Shaquille O'Neal recently. Now, he spoke to us during the pandemic at one of our big franchise partner conferences, and one of the greatest basketball stars of all time. And Shaquille happened to be available because he was working from home, just like everyone was during the pandemic, and spoke to our franchise partners. And I got to understand that he is a bit of the franchise king. I interviewed him in a fireside chat virtually, and he said, listen, I don't need to be the guy building the race car. I just want to drive the race car. So what he does is he takes a model like an Annie's Pretzels or a Five Guys Burgers, and he takes a franchise and says, I know everything I learned from basketball, which is leadership, competitive instincts and fire, how to rally a team, how to execute on a vision. I can take a business that's already created, put that team in and fire them up. They can really springboard that franchise into the universe quickly. And so he's built amassed a wealth of $500 million, not just from basketball, but mostly from his business ventures. And that was a shift for me in franchising methodology of how people see franchises. Because I'm like, if this is good enough for Shaq, it was that real premise of he doesn't need to build it. He just needs to drive it. And we've seen that with our franchise owners. If I look at myself, I would have been a terrible franchise owner because I need to build it. I need to create from scratch. When I bake or when I cook, I look at a recipe and I get some inspiration, but then I do it my way. And I might make a mistake and that's okay, but I need to create something from scratch. So I think a lot of it is understanding as an entrepreneur or a want to be entrepreneur, a soon to be entrepreneur, what's your style? What gets you fired up?
Yeah, it's actually one of the most fun questions that we have in class when we're teaching the Rubbish Boys case about you, asking, would Brian have been a good franchisee? And the students go back and forth on it. In the end, they come around, I think, to saying there's two very different animals at work here. The two of them have to be able to learn how to play in the sandbox together. The founder of the franchisor and then the franchisee, but very different profiles, very different things that they are each wanting to do in life. And so the Shaq versus Brian example, I think, concretizes that also.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the two different animals can work together. So you take a Paul Guy, which we talk about in the case, was our first franchise partner. He and I were butting heads, and I don't usually butt heads with anybody. I'm a people person. I get along with people, but he and I struggled until he ran the first franchise. I became the franchisor. We had different roles, but we depended on each other, and still great friends to this day because he's done amazing things with our business, but we both believe we've done it together and played a role together. So both hats are equally as admirable, but it's knowing yourself that's most important.
Yeah. So let's back up to those very early days. So you have that first truck. You go out, you start learning the business. You also start building a team around you. Talk about the key lessons early on. Talk about the key decisions that you were making at that point.
Yeah. So early on, I hired people based on, you put an ad in the classifieds. Back in the day, we used to have those, and you'd get phone calls and you bring people in for an interview. I didn't know what I was looking for. Does someone need to be strong to haul the junk? Do they need to have done this before? I really didn't know. And I made some mistakes. I brought in people that I wasn't enjoying working with. We don't have private offices to this day in our office, but we used to back then. I had my own private corner office and I would hide in it because I stopped enjoying interacting with the people that I had hired. So 5 years into the business, 1994, I one morning decided, or the night before decided, to fire my entire team. The old saying, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. I probably had 9 of 11 were bad apples. Now, not bad people, but we didn't jive. I wasn't a good leader with them. I didn't inspire them. To them, it was an hourly job. They couldn't care less. And so I brought them in the morning and I said 2 words: I'm sorry. I'm sorry I've let you down as a leader. I didn't bring in the right people, treat you with the support and love you needed to be successful. I don't know what to do but to start from scratch. And I went from 5 trucks, $500,000 in revenue down to just me, but slowly and surely rebuilding the business until I could get to such a point where I knew what the right people were and that I'd figured out the secret sauce. And the secret sauce became this: someone that I would enjoy a conversation with, someone that I would like to be in the trucks with. And I know when I get out of the trucks, they would also have a smile on their faces and how they dealt with customers. Were they interesting? Were they interested? Did they have a shared passion in life? Junk removal was not the end game for them. It was making customers happy. It was building something and having fun in the moment. And when we became clear that we hire happy people, the rest was history. It's worked like magic. We have 600 employees in our head offices, 5,000 employees across Canada and the US. They're smiley, happy people. And when we're careful in who we bring on board, that made all the difference.
Okay, so that's within the employee base. And there's actually a very delightful pattern that we'll talk about as we accumulate some of this. That is a lot of fun to delve into, because it's a very different way that you think about undoing your mistakes. That's another one of the core topics that we've been talking about. Let's put another one of those up on the board. You had a co-founder early on. Talk about a lesson that you learned about the co-founder side of it.
Yeah, I had a co-founder that I brought in as a 50-50 partner early days on, for one reason and one reason only, and that was camaraderie. I didn't think I could do this alone. I didn't have the confidence. I wasn't sure in myself. I wanted someone to go out there and pound the pavement with and build a business with and hire people with. And it turned out he wanted to spend more time skiing, more time hanging with his girlfriend. He didn't want to run the business. It was mostly my ideas. And a conflict that many entrepreneurs have early on is realizing that one partner is giving a lot more than the other. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it's perceived. And somewhere in between, in my situation, I said, you know what? I want to build this, and I want to build it my way. I've got a long-term vision here, and I love my business. And I bought my partner, John, out. And it was tough because I paid a lot of money for something that I gave him. I didn't even charge him to come in as a partner. I just said, hey, we went to school together. We'll love this. And while we did have a lot of fun, and while it did, the value for me in buying him out, looking back, it was worth the price of the confidence it gave me to go, I can do this on my own. And I had the courage from there on to make the tough decision and go on and grow it.
Yeah, so both of these decisions, just try to highlight the pattern across here, both of these were make or break decisions, bet the company, swing for the fences. Because for you to buy out that co-founder, put you almost at zero cash in the venture, where you had an amount that you thought was critical to be having there. The employees you talked about, going from 5 trucks and essentially completely restarting based on it and things like that. And so I remember having my own realization, teaching rubbish boys back to back with a case on the founding of Nike. And we had Phil Knight, who also made, as almost every entrepreneur does, mistakes along the way. And what he did was he would bite back a little bit to try to undo his mistake. Versus when I would ask the students, how is Brian undoing his mistakes? They would say drastic, those kinds of synonyms that they're using for it.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about why you saw that when you're hitting the undo key as the bet the company to undo a mistake versus the incremental approach to being able to undo a mistake?
Yeah, it's a great question, Noam. I think when you're a smaller enterprise at $1 million level, at a $500,000 level, the consequences of your decisions are not as grave. So swinging for the fences, so to speak, $500,000 in revenue, and I'm wiping out the entire team. It's because I believe that was the smartest decision at the time, that even those 2 that might not have been bad apples, I don't know if they were tainted and was going to destroy my company. I had to start from scratch, but I knew I've done it. I did it once. I can do it again. I can rebuild my business, but in a better way. And luckily it worked. But I think, would I do that today at a $600 million business? Of course not. I'm not wiping out all of my employees. We've got great people, thankfully, but I learned a hard decision at a smaller scale that allowed us to become who we are today. So, but I also learned I wasn't a great CEO or president, leader of my company at a certain point past 100 million. It was too complicated for me, and I'm too fly by the seat of my pants and very ADD. I needed rigor and discipline. And today was the 11-year anniversary of Eric Church, who's our president. He brings in this discipline. He comes from a past military background and a big corporate background. And he's able to say, Brian, great idea, but let's park that and talk about it in 6 months, or let's talk about it in 6 weeks. Or rarely he might say, wow, that's a good idea. We need to act on now. But having that balance of the entrepreneurial fire, that let's just fire, ready, aim, that's been important. And so making tough decisions drastically worked at a younger age in the company's life cycle wouldn't work today.
I want to point out a few things for our listeners here because it's going to connect you back to earlier episodes. One of the things that we spoke in an earlier episode is the idea of partners versus employees. And it sounds, Brian, from what you just said, but I have a question about something earlier. But what you just said was interesting, which is you began with a founder and then you had to buy him out. And then you built the business on your own, which probably wasn't easy. And like you said earlier, there's probably tons of battle scars when you had to sort of hold down the ADD to get it done when you wanted to be doing something else until it was big enough and profitable enough to actually afford someone at that level. So it's an interesting balance that we covered earlier that it's nice to hear again, that if you build the business and you go through that challenge, you may be able to bring great people on without turning them into founders and giving away equity at the business.
Of course, you're wearing so many hats in the beginning, and you have to. It's pure necessity. There's no profitability there in any business to get it to the point you need to, where you can have specialists wearing certain hats. But then once it does grow, what an awesome thing to do. I get to, in my company now, be the chief storyteller. I get to deal with inspiring possibility and others within our company and the culture, some new strategy, new businesses. I focus on nothing but things that I love and I'm great at. I have specialists in other areas that are able to do the rest. Could I have done that in day one or day 2000? No. It takes time and it takes money to be able to afford those types of people.
The other thing that I wanted to point out, which is great, is that you're wearing a hat that says it's all about people.
Right.
It's a great hat. I'm sure a lot of CEOs wear it, whether they wear it specifically or figuratively. But how many people are willing to say, I'm going to bet the house on people? And I think it's a good indicator of your value, that you were able to say, no, I really mean it. It's all about people. And let me show you. And I think when you look at companies now, especially smaller companies that have similar sizes to what you had, I don't think a lot of CEOs that'll all give you the same line. No, it's all about people. I don't think they'll get up in the morning and say, no, I actually mean it, and I'm willing to bet the house on that. That was a watershed moment, I think, not only for your company, but for your value set, that you've shown yourself and the next people that came in. This isn't something that goes on my wall and that I use it to tell some of my investors, but this is really the core of my value system, which really does shape the culture differently than most.
The first thing someone sees walking through the door, through the office of the Junction, our head office, big decal, a big sign, and it says it's all about people with my name below it. And it's that commitment to, this is a hat I'm wearing all the time, even if I'm never actually wearing the hat. It is all we stand for. And so where it's been very valuable, Charlie, is when people come to us, an employee in the organization, and they say, listen, you just made some decisions here, Brian, that I think weren't all about people. I'm open to the discussion. Let's talk about how we do it better next time. Where didn't we have enough heart? What would they have done if they were the CEO of the company? And we've made mistakes, clearly, but we learn from them. And so at a time, 2008, the financial meltdown, and we'd fired 52 people or let go 52 people on one day. That was a really hard decision for me as a leader. But the one thing I heard from people in the company is they said, you know what? Tough decision, we get it, but you did it in an it's all about people way.
Great.
Okay, very interesting. So you have the initial team now in place after a restart. You have the solo founder who it's very clear who's making the decisions and where the buck stops. You're starting to now grow. Let's head into something, the unique side of what we're going to be covering here, in addition to all the founding pieces that we're talking about. You establish the initial model, and the default would be to grow organically. Let's do the next one ourselves. Let's do the next one after that ourselves, and things like that. How did you decide to go with the growth strategy of franchising instead?
I was always enamored with McDonald's, not necessarily the food, but the model of what they were building or how they were building entrepreneurs. So even when I coined the term Entrypreneurship, someone's entry point into the world of entrepreneurship, if they've never done it before, a franchise gives someone a proven recipe. And so I started to see my role as, can I give that proven recipe? 8 years into my business, it started to look, feel, and act so much like a franchise because we were so buckled up in our systems, our processes, and every time we launched a new truck or a new team, they had a way of doing it, just almost like an airline checklist, like a pilot would have. And I said, wow, I think our model for growth is franchising. And so I went back to that Ray Kroc, what he did to the McDonald's brothers concept, and how he was able to scale, giving others skin in the game, making it their business. That was the model that I wanted to choose, but I knew nothing about it. It was incredibly complicated, and more franchisors fail than ever succeed because it's such a complicated business. They don't hire the right people. They don't bring the right franchise partners on board, and it crumbles very quickly. But I was attracted to it and knew that it was exactly the model I wanted to choose. I wasn't driven by the money of the model because it's a more expensive model to start, but I was driven by someone owns a business. Like my grandparents owning that Army surplus store, this is someone owning their own business, and the pride of ownership is what I think fired me up.
What at 8 years told you proven recipe, now ready for being able to spread?
It just started to show itself up in every time we'd launch a new truck. So I expanded to Victoria on Vancouver Island, a ferry ride away. And I remember when we launched the Rubbish Boys there, it was just easy. I'm like, I've done this in Vancouver. I know the marketing plan. I know the financials. I know the pricing, the customer experience, the training, the support. And we had it so well proceduralized, if you will. We created manuals and a training system for our people to make sure that we did it right every single time. And it started just to look and feel like a franchise. I thought, let's see if we can do this. Now, we took Paul Guy, who ran our operation for a couple of years and did an amazing job at it. It took me 8 years to get my revenue to $1 million in annual revenues. It took Paul Guy, when he became the first franchise owner, 1 year. He did it by the end of his first calendar year, so much faster than me, because he had the cookie cutter process that was in place. And today he's doing over 100 million in revenue. He's been able to scale it really nicely. So for me, franchising was the right thing, because it started to, when I researched the industry and understood what it took to be successful, people said, you need a system. Hey, we got a system. I can do this. But advisors in the franchise world that I went to go meet, people from McDonald's and other great franchisors, said, Brian, you can't franchise junk removal. Someone's just going to buy their own truck. Why would they buy in? And my answer to that was tweaking the model and going from the Rubbish Boys to 1-800-GOT-JUNK. A national brand, one phone number, a national call center where we did the booking and the dispatch. And that seemed to please or appease our advisors. And they said, okay, you might be onto something. And here we are today.
Okay. So what would you say separates a great franchisee from the rest? What are the characteristics when you are trying to figure out if someone's going to be good at the franchisee side of it? What's the most elusive characteristic that you think is important?
So Paul Guy exemplifies this as our first franchise partner, and then so do any of the other successful ones we have in place. So first and foremost, 3 words: focus, faith, and effort. So focus is the ability to do this business and this business only, especially when someone gets started. Don't try and run a junk removal company and then another home service at the same time. Be focused just on this versus another job. We've had franchise partners fail that say, I'm going to work in this business full time, but then they do a job on the side to help fund it. It just doesn't work. You've got to give it your all. Faith and effort. Faith is believing in the model and believing in yourself. Too many people get out there and they go, this doesn't work in my market. They've got to have a bit of blind faith in the early days, as did Paul Guy, to really drive this business forward. And then the effort, the hard work. Starting a business is not easy. Shaquille O'Neal will tell you it's not easy. Even though you've taken a franchise, which might seem easier, it can be more predictable and more manageable. There's a formula behind it, but it requires a lot of effort. So our top franchise partners work the system. And what's interesting is when new franchise partners come into the system and they go talk to the veterans and they say, so what's the one thing I need to know? They will all say, follow the system, trust the system. It works. And when they didn't follow it in the early days and then realized I need to follow the system, That's what made the difference for them.
Yeah. So one thing that you're bringing to mind is I remember teaching it might have been the first or second time. And right after class, one of the students comes charging down from the top row, was a military veteran. You just mentioned going to the veterans and stuff like that. This is a literal veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I was looking for how I could get into entrepreneurship. And I found myself, I can execute like anything if you hand me the manual. If you show me a system that is proven and things like that, that is what I have excelled at and throughout my career until now. And he had now figured out how he'd be able to become the equivalent of a Paul Guy within the system.
Interesting. Something fascinating we found. You asked what makes great franchise owners. People that have been in the military, they can be great because they know how to follow systems. Navy pilots, airline, people that have flown fighter jets. We've had 8 of them. They've all failed. I was trying to wrap my head around why, because they must be good at following systems, but they are told this is one way and the only way to do this. You don't have time to make mistakes, life or death up in the air with two choices. Do you do A? Do you do B? This is how you're taught to do it. Someone can follow the system, but know that things happen that don't fit into the manual, that aren't on plan, that they need to have a level of entrepreneurial spirit in there to say, this is what the manual says, but now how do I adapt to my situation? Who do I talk to? Take some time to think about it, but not too much time. It's interesting. Fighter pilots just didn't work in our business. And to this day, we still, if someone says, oh yeah, I used to fly jets, we say, congratulations, but this isn't going to be a space for you.
What I love about this story is that you had almost built the franchise concept before you knew it was a franchise concept. You had already been looking at systems and efficiencies before you knew about that. I think many times in company, I was involved in a company, still am, where they were public and they went private. And when they went private, they told themselves, we're not giving up the rigor of a public company because it disciplined us. And as a result, in the private sphere, we're able to attract a higher level of investor that they didn't even know they were going after then because they stood out from other private companies. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great concept that people should understand, which is when doing business, if you do it right, you don't know what's going to come down the pike that'll give you an opportunity, right? You didn't know that all the stuff you were doing, which is just making your business better, would actually open you up to a whole new path later on.
Yeah, it's I go back to that comment of these overnight success stories sure take a long time. It is a long-term investment when anyone builds a business. There's no overnight wins, and it is thinking with the long term in mind and saying, okay, if I take care of my people, while that isn't paying early days and is expensive, one day it will kick into play and be a smart decision. So you're absolutely right, Charlie.
I'm going to exercise executive rights to make the decision that I would love, Brian, to hold you over to our next episodes. There's a bunch more that I know that we have to be able to learn from you. And so let's break this into another 2-parter of being able to delve into the entrepreneurship ace and being able to learn from him.
Amazing.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Founders Dilemmas podcast. Stay tuned to our next episode as we continue with Brian, and we look forward to seeing you then.